What is up, everyone? Happy New Year. Roy here, and you're listening to the Clemenz with a Z podcast. I have another episode in our ongoing segment. We were in a cult, and if you're new to this podcast, this series is a space where I explore the experience of people who, like me, once found themselves deeply entrenched in a high demand religious environment. It was a place where the lines between faith, control, and community often blurred in unsettling ways. In this episode, I'm sitting down with Nat, someone I've been eager to have on the show for a while now. Nat brings a deeply personal and insightful perspective to the question that drives this series. We were in a cult? It's a question that's simple on the surface, but becomes increasingly complex as we untangle the stories, emotions, and lessons from our time in these environments. Together, Nat and I discuss the subtle ways that manipulation can show up in the name of faith, the emotional toll it takes, and the difficult process of rebuilding a sense of self after leaving. We'll talk about how something that seems supportive and spiritual at first glance can turn out to be controlling and harmful beneath the surface. We'll also reflect on the moments that finally opened our eyes, moments that were painful but also necessary for growth. This conversation is raw, reflective, and at times challenging, but it's also filled with hope and resilience, as Nat shares how she's working to heal and reclaim her story. If you've ever wondered how high-demand groups impact the lives of those within them, or you've questioned the nature of your own experiences, this episode will offer insight and encouragement. So settle in and let's get into it. All right, we are live. Hey Nat, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am great. Welcome to this conversation that we've been having for over a year now. And we were in a cult. I'm glad that you can add your story to this, maybe add some insight, maybe get us closer to answering that question. So we should just dive right in. So how did you get involved into the ICOC?
I was born into it. I was what is known as a kingdom kid. So my parents were both involved before I was born, and I grew up in it.
Mhm. Yes, another Kingdom kid.
Yes.
What a
So,
club that we're in,
oh
right?
my goodness. Yeah, what a club. Such a wild experience.
Yeah, it's really funny. I think we do have a very specific experience to this whole thing that
Hmm.
other people don't. I say it all the
And
time, but like I don't know if you felt this, but it's just like our entire reality was
yes,
framed through this.
absolutely.
Mhm. And it's so much unlearning that we're doing.
I agree. I've been out for 2 years now, and
Mhm.
it's been such a process.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So so your parents were in this so in the beginning, what was your view of God?
I think it was different at different points in my life. I think when
Mhm.
I was young, I really did see him just as good and a wonderful creator. We
Mhm.
would sing um, Blue Skies and Rainbows at Kids Kingdom, and we would pray to, you know, thank you prayers. And so I think, during my early years, it was really a simple love. And at that
Mhm.
point, like, it was good. You know, I think as I got older, it got a lot more complicated. I think I started
Mhm.
to view him as capricious, and I, had nightmares from a young age about just hell. And so I think a lot of fear started coming into my relationship with God, probably honestly in like elementary school.
Mhm.
Um,
You use capricious. Wow. That's that is what an awesome word and what a choice, a word to choose for that, but it tracks.
Yeah,
It's really funny how the view of God it's sort of wrapped in fear, even though
yeah.
there's like kindness and joy,
hmm
but it's fear, right?
Right, right.
Do
Yeah.
you do you remember like for me, I felt um like someone was always watching.
I think that I didn't have the presence of mind as a child to consider that, but I think that later on reflecting back, I did feel that way, certainly.
Yeah. I don't know if you have a thought of like, can you remember like thinking about the idea of like, oh, this is the time if I were
Mm.
to like die, I might be
Oh,
going to hell.
all the time. I
Hmm.
think that my mom, and it's funny because now I think in the Bible, I can't think of a single place that talks about the age of accountability. But I remember a
Hmm.
lot of tearful middle of the nights waking up from nightmares about hell, and my mom being
Hmm.
like, well, you're only 11 or however old I was at the time. You haven't reached the age of accountability, so you'd still be okay. And I don't know where that comes from scripturally, but I remember, yeah, many times throughout childhood where I just thought, wow. And then, of course, as a teenager, much more. And I think
Hmm.
even, we'll get to the baptism and the studies in a little bit later, but
Hmm.
even after the point of being baptized, I think I still constantly was second guessing it. Was my baptism legitimate? Am I really saved? All that.
Hmm. Yeah, because they really did a good job at making us fearful of hell, right?
Yes. Yes.
Making sure that we knew there was a punishment and that punishment was forever.
Oh yeah.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seemed to me upon reflection that the were afraid that if they didn't hold that fear over us, then um like who knows what we might do. There was like this unknown, like, oh, if we don't rule them with fear, who knows what they might do.
Yeah. Yeah. Fear and brokenness. That's how we get
Hmm.
to God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out where it comes from, the age of accountability.
Hmm.
Um, because I don't know necessarily think it's anywhere in the Bible.
Yeah.
For me, the 13 comes to mind. Like
Yeah.
that's the
That's what they
age.
always told me too.
And it's interesting, 13 was the time that I knew. I
Hmm.
just realized I had just sinned.
Right.
And I remember feeling like, okay, well now if I die, I'm going to
Hmm.
hell.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anything anyone could say that would make me feel better about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though I always had this fear of hell, even from a very, very
Mhm.
young age, I don't think it was until I was probably 15 that I really had an awareness of my own sin. Like they were telling me about it constantly, but I just don't feel like I understood. And I think that's when some of my like more, I guess you would say like significant things started happening. And so I think that's when I really started thinking, oh, wow, I am wretched. Whereas before that, I was just scared of God.
Wretched. Like, what a word to use to describe yourself. But
Right.
like, I've used that dozens of times.
Right.
It's like I'd be praying
Hmm.
about whatever sin I committed,
Hmm.
and it would be like, I'm wretched. There was a psalm I would always read in a prayer if I was feeling exceptionally bad. I think it's
Yeah.
like Psalm 53 or something like
Was
that.
it David's prayer of repentance? Psalm
Maybe
51? Or
51. Yeah,
yeah.
Psalm 51, where, and I would just
Yep.
be like, I
Hmm.
would be sobbing that prayer to
Yes.
God in the hopes that, like,
Yep. Been there. Hmm.
in the hopes that the God would be forgiving me, you
Yes.
know. Sorry, I'm
Yes.
looking it up right now.
That's okay.
I'm looking, yep. Have mercy on, oh yeah. It's that have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love,
Yeah.
according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions, wash away all my iniquity, and cleanse
Hmm.
me from my sin.
Yeah.
Against you, you only have I sinned. I was
Hmm.
sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Like
Wow.
I would be screaming that sometimes and
Yeah.
like trying to put myself in David's place, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But I haven't read that. Oh, and this is apparently right after he had committed that adultery with Bathsheba. Wow,
Yeah.
we're bringing out the Bible in this conversation.
Oh yeah.
It's such an emo song though. Like I this could be a definitely like a My Chemical Romance or like a
I could see
dashboard.
that. I could see that. Jars of Clay did a song based on it that was actually pretty good, but I don't remember the title. I know they're not an
Jars
emo
of
band, but
yeah,
yeah.
Jars of Clay. Man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, did
Anyway.
you did you view God as a male? I mean, just I that's
Oh
something
yeah.
that I
There's never any other assumption.
God is male.
Yeah.
Um, did you think that God looked like you, or was it a white guy? Or or
Um,
is that like it just wasn't there? I,
I don't think I ever had a physical embodiment of God in my mind. I think in my teen years, I put it together that Jesus was Middle Eastern,
hmm
and I used to get like pretty irritated when people would depict him as white. Um, so there's that because it just seemed, you know, inaccurate. But
It was such an edgy thing to say sometimes that like, Jesus wasn't white.
right, I know. And people, I at some point I was having this conversation with someone, and she was like, "Well, maybe he might have been because some Jews are white." And I was like, "But do you know the history of the Jewish people? Like he was an Israeli Jew in Jerusalem, like not in Jerusalem, but like there are people who are Jewish who are white. That is something that happens, but Jesus was in the Middle East. This is before that diaspora and all the history things that
Mm,
have happened." So,
yeah.
I mean, who knows? Who knows? This is one of those things that in the scheme of things really doesn't matter, but it does bother me
Yeah.
when that happens. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it does. It matters in regards to the conversation because I think there's a bunch of people that talk about how like we view God based on our parents,
Mm-hmm.
and then we also maybe it's being like Caucasian, but we start to believe that Jesus and God look like us,
Right.
and it's represented in everything, you know?
Right. Right.
And so there's like an ownership
Mm-hmm.
because I remember like putting two and two together
Mm-hmm.
that Jesus was Middle Eastern and all of that. And it was
Yeah.
like this like moment of like
Mm-hmm.
clarity of like, wow, okay,
Right. Right.
that changes things. And
Right.
it wasn't like a negative thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was just this thing when I realized I just assumed that God and Jesus looked like me.
Right. Well, and I think personally, not being white and having different cultures, I think
Mhm.
to me, those are not all of who I am, but it is an
Mhm.
important aspect of my experience. And so it does erase some of Jesus's experience here on earth if we take him out of context of where and when he lived.
Yeah. Yeah, we it was some it's weird how because it's when you look at the Bible and you look at the story, it's a story of not us, but
Hmm.
we take it on as us.
Right. And interpret it through
Hmm
ways that sometimes it was never meant to be.
Yeah, we take something that wasn't our story and make it our story.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's interesting.
It is. It is. I love it. I love talking about stuff like this.
Me too.
Well, let's go back to so in the beginning, in
Hmm.
the beginning,
In the beginning.
what were like your earliest memories of the church? Were they good? Were they bad?
So almost 2 years out, I'm still trying to figure out how to tell my story when it comes
Mhm.
to this because I do feel like I had two simultaneous childhoods. And I think that's the best way I know how to describe it. I feel like I had this bright, wonderful, happy experience with a lot of great things. And then there was
Mhm.
also all this darkness all these terrible things that like I kind of some of them just thought was normal. Um,
Hmm.
and I feel like these things were happening parallel to each other. So I would say it was both wonderful and really bad in different ways.
Yeah.
Um,
And so
can
where
you,
you were, they didn't
yeah.
have like they didn't have like buildings, so you had to rent like
Oh, yeah.
okay.
So, from birth to my early teen years or mid-teen years, I lived in a big city. And so our church was a really huge, one of the big ICOC churches.
Mm,
And then after that point, we moved to a smaller, more recent church planting. So during my years in the really big church, we would meet at like hotels and conference centers and occasionally like a really big, city high school. Um, but yeah, most of my early memories at church were like in random hotel ballrooms or,
yeah.
running around exploring some building. Um,
Hmm.
and then my later years, we were renting out schools. And so that was a little bit more stable, like, because I think when we had the hotels, I feel like the location changed a lot.
Yeah. And so when you in the beginning it was bright. It was so did you feel like you had like friends and family and like connections?
Oh, yeah. So I do have a decent amount of family in the church. I
Hmm.
did then and I do now. Um, I always had a lot of friends. You know, I think that was one of the really lovely things as a kid was that
Hmm.
we were always somewhere doing something. And so
Yeah.
there were
Hmm.
always kids to play with. And now as a parent, I'm looking back and thinking, maybe it would have been good to have some time at home and not always to have been somewhere. Um,
I think about that so much.
because I have few memories of being home.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
can
Yeah.
you relate to that?
100%. I think about it's can it has come to the forefront of my mind
Hmm.
being a parent and
Yes.
thinking about that, especially now during
Hmm.
the holidays and the traditions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like everything revolved around the church, our traditions or the church's
Yes.
traditions, you know?
Yeah. It's
Hmm.
interesting to me too. I won't go too far off on a tangent again, but
Hmm.
just how the way that ICOC was was all that we knew, and yet
Hmm.
now being outside of the ICOC, um, and attending other churches and being able to see like what quote unquote normal Christian Christmas traditions are, like even they'll light the Advent candles, or some
Hmm.
different churches will like change things for different parts of the church year. And I remember looking down on that because I was taught to think that all those traditions are like extra things made by man. But
Hmm.
now, really learning more what comes behind them, like they're meant to bring kind of meaning and unification.
Yeah. We we brought the Advent candles into
Hmm.
our family's Christmas tradition, and we I didn't want to do it with regards to get
Sure.
super God or church or Jesus focused. It just was like I'm just trying to. I've just been thinking, what kind of traditions do I want during the holidays?
Right.
And the thought of lighting a candle one evening with my family and talking
Hmm.
about hope for the night, like
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But I didn't learn about Advent until this year.
Right. Right.
Isn't that weird? It's
Yes. No, so much a similar experience. There's all these
Mhm.
things that are common to
Mhm.
Christianity that I never heard of.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, because we were talking about, I was talking with someone who was a former member, and
Hmm.
their significant other was just like, "You guys know so much about the Bible." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah." And there's also
Hmm.
thousands of things that we don't know because everything that we know is very insular and
Yes,
it
very
was
much.
like framed in a certain way. And we would learn about other things, but it would be if we would
Hmm.
learn about it in order to disprove
Yes.
them. you know?
Yes. We always had to be prepared to
Hmm.
give an answer for the hope that we had, but it wasn't
Hmm.
really the hope, it was like the fear.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. No,
And
I agree.
mhm. So it was nice, but you mentioned parallel. So what was it about that made it was the dark?
So yeah, I think, you know, I guess before I get into that, I do want to be clear for in case I guess any people who are still connected to the church are hearing this at some point. I do want to be clear that there was a lot of good as well as a lot of
Hmm.
bad. Um, and, you know, I acknowledge that there were a lot of people who really were well meaning. And I had
Hmm.
lots of people over the years who did love me and nurture me and support me. So that was the case, and I'm grateful for that. Um, yeah, just as far as the bad, I think, you know, there was a very significant lack of supervision. Um, and that was fun as a kid sometimes. But I just feel like I don't know, like it was all I knew. And so this is more looking back, but I think I realized that really the church was made to be our family. And I think they took the place of our family in a lot of ways. Like my parents are amazing people. I love them. I'm appreciative of them. I think they did a lot of things really well. However, I got a lot of my things that I learned in my worldview growing up was taught to me by not by my parents, right? By the church. And I think a lot of those damaging things sunk so deep because we were always at other people's houses or at church events. And so it's like we were really being raised by the church as much as by our parents. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, there was a lot of, I guess we'll probably get to this later too when I talk about just reasons that I left, but there was a lot of abuse that happened, both to myself and to many other Kingdom kids that I knew. And again, this falls under, oh, that's normal, right? Because it's what you know. But um, so that was the dark part.
Like, was it just like physical abuse?
Um, I don't think I want to get into it too much.
Sure.
I think,
No worries.
some physical, some sexual.
Hmm.
And there's lots of lawsuits out right now. So
Yeah. Yeah, the being raised by the church is something I it's hard to let go of.
yeah.
Um, as I try to reflect on my life.
Hmm.
Um, I used to I used to dread my parents going to marriage retreats and
Hmm.
parent retreats
Yeah.
because they would always come back with new ways to discipline us.
Oh, really?
And in a lot of ways, I mean, I do love there
Hmm.
was a lot of love at my house.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was like it was
Hmm.
just like they were just a mouthpiece for the
Right.
church and
Hmm.
all that they were saying to
Yeah.
us and how they raised us, you know?
Hmm. Right. Right. And in my case, a lot more of it was at friends' houses, with friends'
Hmm.
parents, because they felt like, um, well, some of it was because of just the lack of supervision and being
Yeah.
around really strangers all the time. I think there
Hmm.
was truly an attitude that if this person's a disciple, then they're trustworthy, right? And so I
Hmm.
think that us Kingdom kids got trusted with people in a lot of situations that we shouldn't have. Um, and I think that our friends' parents also, at least I shouldn't generalize. This is my experience. My friends' parents, in some cases, felt like they had the authority to, I guess, choose how to raise me or choose how to discipline
Hmm.
me.
Yeah. If we were in a place and we were being too loud or out of control, I mean, they could say whatever they wanted to us,
Yeah.
you know? Adults in the church were only to be trusted and listened to and obeyed.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. Right. Without,
And I'm sorry. It's just tough. It's tough to like I think we put too much trust into people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely felt like, and this also gets into one aspect of
Hmm.
the reason that I ended up leaving. I think starting to experience what it's like outside of the ICOC, I've realized something that it took me years to put my finger on what it was. And that was that really kids were treated in some cases like as second class citizens. Like it felt like just it just felt like children were an afterthought. And, the kingdom was this great calling and this great mission. And I think kids got put to the sidelines a lot.
A lot of things got put to the sidelines. Kids,
Yeah.
mental health,
Oh, yeah.
anything, because yes, it was the thing that mattered was the movement. The
Yes.
thing that mattered was
Mm-hmm.
the kingdom,
Yep.
getting, preaching saving the world, all that stuff. Um,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so you're growing up and you get to your teenage years in the
Mm-hmm.
church and you decide to study the Bible. What was the motivation to study the Bible?
So my friends tease me that I grew up under a rock in the desert, because there were so many things that if someone didn't directly tell me, I just had no idea. And so somehow I went through all these years until I was like 16, not really understanding that there even was a Bible study series and that was how you got baptized. Um, I think I just assumed at some point that I would get baptized, but I didn't really know the process or think about it too much. Which I'm just laughing because it was like all around us all the time. We were constantly
It
going to
was.
baptisms and at people's houses because my parents were studying with them. Like, so I don't know how I missed that, but I did.
Yeah.
So, an older, you know, like campus age woman asked me if I wanted to study the Bible. And I thought it was so cool, in high
Yeah.
school that a campus student wanted to hang out with me and have a quiet time.
Yeah.
So I thought we were like getting coffee and talking about Jesus, right? And
Oh no.
I had no idea that this was like targeted at me. Um, I hear almost every other Kingdom kid say they went through the character studies. I never did, to my knowledge. And I
Me
was in a
neither.
really
Mhm.
okay.
They were either I think I was 15,
Uh-huh.
so I was probably maybe too old for the character studies, or
It's probably why.
they wanted to just they just wanted to try to get me in, hit the
Hmm,
ground running. But no, I never got to do the character studies. I think it was an age thing. If you were like 12,
that makes sense. That makes
because
sense.
I do think we cared a lot about the age of people getting baptized more than most contemporary Christian
Hmm.
churches, because I've seen baptisms of kids at like 9. And it's
Yes.
weird to me that I'm just like, that's weird.
Right. Right.
And I wonder if it's weird to me because it's a child, or it's weird to me because it's just old programming. Like,
Right.
mhm,
It's funny how often those thoughts in just random parts of life come up. And
mhm.
like this is a bit silly, but
It's
also
okay.
maybe paints a good picture. Have you ever read or seen The Hunger Games?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Uh
Traumatized.
oh yeah.
Traumatized by that movie. But anyway, go ahead.
When PETA is getting deprogrammed from being
Hmm.
brainwashed, like, and he keeps playing this game with Katniss, real or not real, and he's
Hmm.
trying to figure out what's real and what's not real. I feel like coming out of the church, like, um, I don't know, I feel like I related to that so much. There are constantly
Hmm.
things where I'm like, wait, is this real or not real? This thought or this way that I was taught.
That is something that is, yeah, you're going to be dealing with that for a while, because I still deal with that.
Yeah, I'm
And I've been
sure.
out for I've been out for over it for more than over a decade. Yeah.
Wow.
Not
Yeah.
real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm constantly questioning thoughts of like,
Mm-hmm.
do I really feel strongly about this? Or
Right.
is it because of
Right.
um programming? I mean, I had to do that with having a kid.
Mm.
I had to reconcile with the fact of, do I want to have a kid because I want to have a kid, or I
Right.
feel like I have to have a kid
Right.
because, that was the thing. You get married, then you have a kid. And so
Mm-hmm.
I had really had to take time, because I remember feeling very overwhelmed and scared at the prospect
Yeah.
of having a child. And it was just like, I just never asked myself, did
Mm-hmm.
I want one? Just assume, yeah, no, we'll just do it. I'm
Right.
grateful that I chose yes. I'm
Right.
grateful that I have my child. It's amazing and it's wonderful. But
Right.
that's just an example of something that I've had to like think about.
Absolutely.
So with so yeah, so you're getting cornered at at a coffee shop to study the Bible. Um
Yeah. So I thought, she just wanted to spend time with me and have a quiet time. I was like, yeah, sure. If I had known what it was, to be honest, I still very likely would have done it. But it's just
mhm,
funny to me now that I had no idea. Um, I think that came at a really strange junction in my life because up until maybe a year before that, I had been really pretty like pure in my love for God. Pretty
mhm,
innocent, um, and just not innocent in like sheltered, but innocent in the way of like I just really didn't know what was out there, and I only knew my own little existence, and God was still just, a loving creator. And for the record, like I do have a more positive view of God now, but that's not what we're talking about yet. Um,
mhm,
I think during my kind of like early high school years, a lot was going on. And, I mentioned that there was a lot of stuff that happened when I was younger. And during this time, I was starting to become aware just that some of those things were not okay. And I was really, honestly, really wrestling with my mental and emotional health. And so when this older woman asked me to study the Bible, I was just at this really interesting intersection in my faith where I was still close to the time where God was good and simple. And I was also just starting to begin this time where I just had so many questions and didn't know where to turn and had a lot of just a lot of really big things I was wrestling with that I think some of them were normal for teens, but I just had no idea.
yeah. Mhm.
And
And
so,
so
yeah.
so what was the study like?
Um, so I mean, in the beginning, it was just the typical learning more about the Bible. I think that was one, like, yeah, I think, we really learned a lot about scripture. And
Mhm.
maybe we were taught how to apply it and taught what it meant, but like we didn't memorize a lot. And so I feel like I did in the beginning, I was just learning a lot, and that was interesting. I think as we got later on, I think my views of the studies are very different now than they were then. I think being
Mhm.
in them, most of them were fine. Now looking back, I see kind of like how we isolated people from their communities, how we really built this reliance on the ICOC. Um, I think the studies got really challenging when, no surprise when it got to the sin study.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think this is another one of those things that I just assumed every church did. Um, and now I know that's not the case. But for those who don't know what the sin study is, basically, after learning about sin and our own brokenness, and they read you every single study has the exact same thing and the same that people say, no matter what part of the church you were in or what age you were, there are certain like analogies they use, and there are very specific ways that people studying the Bible with you are taught to explain the scriptures, and it's very
Yeah. Mhm.
consistent.
Mhm.
Um, and so, during this study, one part of it was that they would read you the Galatians 5 list of sins.
Yep.
And of course, you never get to the fruits of the spirit part. You just stop at the sins.
Yeah.
Um, but, you know, I think there were a lot of things at the time that I felt very convicted of that I now don't think are sin. Like I was very insecure because I was a teenager. Um, and I like, so I think there are a lot of things that while they're not great, they weren't these terrible things that meant I was a horrible person. And yet
Mhm.
I was taught that they were. At
Yeah.
that point, um, in my journey, I was anorexic and I was, um, I had to confess that as a sin. And it was never like, oh, can we help you? It was like something that I needed to constantly confess. Um,
If
and
you
I
don't
think,
mind me asking, sorry, why did you have to
yeah,
confess that as a sin?
because they said that it was idolatry.
T- Talk about reaching.
Yeah, it was idolatry and it was selfish. Um, so
Wow.
I, and they told me I had to tell my mom because I was a teenager, I was a minor. Um, and this is like the first in a string of many huge
Hmm.
things that I was forced to tell someone and I wasn't ready. Um, and so that was just really hard. I had to tell my mom, and that I think broke her heart. And also the side effect was that I still struggled with anorexia, but I couldn't act on it, and nothing was being done to heal the root cause. And so I started harming myself, um, like with cutting. And so
Hmm.
that became an even bigger, truly like an addiction. It became like this grew into a really dark thing. That was later on after studying the Bible and being baptized, though. So
Yeah,
yeah,
whoa. Like, I had, like, I remember a guy discipling me over masturbation and telling me that
yeah.
masturbation was gay sex because you're pleasing a man. And I
Oh my
just think
goodness.
about the ways that we just
Yeah.
screwed it all around, and like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and how damaging that is, because not only are you dealing with anorexia, but now you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking that God is mad at you for
Yeah.
that.
Right. Right. And it just caused all this shame because it was never, here's a symptom of something and like, let's heal from this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to be clear, of course, I don't think anorexia or cutting are good things. I think these are damaging. But if a teenager told me or anyone that they were in that place, I have to hope that my response would be to support them and do what I
Mm-hmm.
could to help and make sure that they had the resources they need.
Yeah. And what a thing for us that we told other people first.
Yes.
Like, everyone, like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, being forced to tell people.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that is something, like, you could not have secrets.
Oh no.
I mean, you found ways. Like, I was talking to someone the other day about how the church made him a really good manipulator
Oh
because of
yeah.
because he was constantly trying to find ways around talking about whatever it was.
That's
Um,
interesting.
but yeah, and everyone had everyone's hand in everybody's business.
Oh yes. You knew that
Yeah,
if you told someone something, then if they were married, their spouse definitely knew, but probably also their closest friends, you know.
man, damn. That's I'm so
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous.
fuck. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot to as a teen man.
Yeah, so it was pretty crazy, but at the same time, I've heard some of the other guests on your show say things
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I always knew something was wrong." I never had that sense. Like I was fully, to use the expression, drinking the Kool-Aid. Like I thought
Yeah.
the church was absolutely right. What my leaders said were God's word. I did not question it. If ever there was something that didn't feel right, it was a problem with me. And that's what I thought. Like no, I had no like even thought of, oh, this is screwed up that the church is doing this. No, it was always
Hmm.
my heart needs to get right. I'm being prideful. I'm being selfish, whatever the case may be.
Hmm. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's something that is a constant theme in my own therapy. That feeling of
Hmm.
I'm always the problem,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
because they taught us really well. They
Yes.
taught us really well how to hold on to shame and guilt, make
Oh,
it our
yes.
friends, and
Hmm.
make it this thing. Like oh man, we loved it.
Oh, yes.
Um, so you go through that. God, I just it's hard to process that,
Oh, I know. I know.
and it's hard to like these are the times when like the anger comes up for me
Yeah.
about stuff
Yeah.
because like the first thing that you needed and when you're in a situation is like you need support, you need
Yep.
love, you need
Hmm.
caring, you need ears, you need hearts to hear, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
um but hey,
Here we
so
are.
you go through the sin study. Did you cry at the cross study? I asked
Of
that
course, I
everybody.
got
Yeah.
baptized, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yes, I did cry at the cross study. You've joked about how that's a requirement, but
Hmm.
I did cry at the cross study. Um, and even for all that I'm looking back now and realizing that things were broken and things were really messed up in a lot of ways, I think that I do value how much scripture I learned. I wish it had been done in a healthy way.
Hmm.
Um, but that is one thing, like, I think now, like, I really know the scriptures very well. And
Hmm.
even though it's playing that game, of is this real? Is this not? I feel like I have this, like all this knowledge just memorized from the years. And so, it's a lot to unlearn, but also I think that's one thing that I do appreciate is how much we did learn because even though I'm having to um, readjust my lenses, like the knowledge is there. Now I just have to figure out what it really means. I think the
Hmm.
biggest thing for me has been the shift from all my life seeing the Bible and God and church through a lens of fear, and now like shifting to see it through a lens of grace. Like the scriptures haven't changed at all, but to me,
Hmm.
the meaning is completely different now, like seeing things through a lens of grace.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you can do that. Yeah, there's I think that I also feel glad that I have this knowledge and these little this traditions because in some way it
Yeah,
gave me a jumping off point
yeah,
to explore like it, I don't know if a landing pad is the right word, but it's kind of like maybe the maybe what I'm trying to say, it's like you learn the basics of coloring,
yeah,
and through learning the colors and how that works, you can also make a beautiful piece of art through that. You don't
yeah,
have to use the basics or all of these things, but you have the knowledge and you know what to go to create something new, right?
yeah, yeah.
That sounds right, right? That
I
sounds
think that's a good way to
clear.
explain it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because like now in my own discovery, I'm not doing this thing of like searching through all of like searching through the Bible as like the first time as like a 40-year-old. It's
right.
like I'm reading these books and they mention a scripture. I'm like, oh, okay, that means okay, that I remember that. And
Yes,
and I can move through that. Um it is I don't want to gloss over this fact, but the thing that you were saying, but we really did
sure.
we really did a good job of like it wasn't just something you were dealing with in life. There was always this
Mm-hmm.
feeling of like,
Mm-hmm.
what am I trying to say? Like to go back, your anorexia was sinning against God.
Yeah.
Like your buying a car was idolatry and it was sinning against God. It was, it was
Mm-hmm.
these things of like
Yeah.
adding, it just heaps on this pressure.
Yes.
on you, and it's like
Yeah.
what do you do with that? You know?
Right. Right. Well, with something like buying a car, especially, it was bad if you didn't get advice, you know?
Yeah. And everything mattered on a
Everything
spirit on a
yes
spiritual level.
was exhausting.
Every single thing. And I think that for me,
hmm
I just couldn't take chances.
Agreed.
Like I couldn't like go to a different college because what if there wasn't a church there? I couldn't
Oh,
like
yeah.
take this job because of
Yes.
who worked there.
We couldn't travel there because we might miss church, or we couldn't move there because it wasn't close enough
Hmm.
to a church, you know?
It just felt like we were on this constant spiritual battle.
hmm And I think there were a
Yeah.
lot of really unnecessary distinctions because even we talked about, not being able to go to a college or somewhere because there wasn't a church. It's because there wasn't an ICOC church, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And like it's just this like just struggling, even like struggling with like sexuality and figuring yourself out as a kid.
Yeah.
It's like for me, there was this spiritual level to
hmm
it that just made it so suffocating and fear
Oh, yeah.
based, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I don't know if you had like similar experiences, but for me, I think also that's something that was overemphasized so much. Especially even I can remember like when I was probably 12, 13, like I had no idea what, you know, like I didn't know the terminology for all these sexual things, but I had like a probably preteen camp counselor who was like asking all these questions about like, do you ever touch yourself and does it feel good? And I remember she got really mad at me because I did not understand that she was asking this in a sexual nature. And I thought she literally meant like touching my skin, like on my arm. And I was confused and she thought I was playing dumb and she got really angry at me. And I feel like things like that would happen all the time where there was this expectation. And we were just, like in that case, I just innocently didn't get what she was talking about. You know, I don't know.
What do
It
you
was
mean you
weird.
don't get what I'm saying? You're just
Yeah.
being prideful. You're being silly.
Right.
You need to be serious.
Right. Right.
This touching yourself's going to send you to hell.
And then I was confused and kind of scared because I didn't understand what she was talking about.
You-
I'm
You're
laughing,
standing
not
around,
crying.
you're afraid to take a shower. You're afraid to like,
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah. Some of the stipulations were just like, wow.
We learned about hell too early and
Oh,
fear.
yeah.
We learned about sex too early.
Oh, yeah. This
Um,
talked about all the time.
so much. It was
Yeah.
talked a lot with girls. In my head,
Uh-huh.
y'all never talked about it. Like
No,
I
we just
still,
talked about it in weird, like, tangential ways. Like, no one would come
yeah,
out and say the words.
yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't have to sit in a circle with a bunch of dudes and talk about it.
No, but we did get told that we were making guys struggle, from like the age of 9.
Yeah.
So that
Hmm.
was great.
Yeah, and I want to get into that in a second, but I want to finish. So I want to
Sure.
finish the studies. I really liked where we went with this because I felt like it needed to be said. But so you
hmm
go through the studies and it is intense and it's all those things, but you
Yeah,
made it.
I did.
You get baptized. What was that
Yeah.
like?
Honestly, the part of getting baptized was good. I think I understood it from the scriptures. I always assumed I would be baptized. There was a little bit of inevitability, because that was just what everyone did if they wanted to be right with God, and they again didn't
Hmm.
want to go to hell, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I do think that there was a purity of my heart in I did love God and I wanted a relationship with him. Yet at the same time, I think everything centered on this idea of the baptism being just right. And so um I guess that's a whole 4-hour conversation that we won't get into. But um
Yeah.
my baptism day itself was great.
Hmm.
I went under the water. My toe did not pop out, so they didn't have to dunk me
Good.
again. I said the
Yes.
words right. It was good.
Yes.
Um, So that's good. Um, I'd gone through all the loopholes of the studies, and so it was legitimate according to them. Um,
Hmm.
like, and I am being a little bit saying things in jest just because, there's this commonality of growing up as Kingdom kids, and it's interesting to talk with someone else. But really, like, I do feel like spiritually, my baptism was a good thing. It was a little bit strange. I remember right after I got baptized, though, one woman from the church came and got my attention, and she said, "Now you're the purest one here because you haven't sinned yet." And then that kind of put this idea in my head of, oh, now that I'm
Right.
baptized, I can't sin because then, like, I'm not saved anymore. And so that
I
was a
thought
little
that's
bit
why you got
confusing.
baptized.
Yeah, exactly. So I was a little bit confused by that. But yeah.
Do you remember the first time you sinned after your baptism?
I don't remember the first time. I think about six
Mm.
months after I started getting into the big sins, like
Oh,
sleeping
yeah.
with your boyfriend type sins. And so
Yeah.
that was a thing. But I only remember like I don't know. I that's I don't remember the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of language that we used
Yes.
in the church. Like, thanks, no pressure, right?
Right, exactly. Exactly. And
Um,
for the rest of my time in the ICOC, I was racked with um doubt as to whether or not I was saved. And I still sometimes have that fear.
eh,
So, that's been a lot to work through.
was it because like you felt like you weren't saved? Was it because you thought the baptism was wrong? Or
Mm, I think I just saw that the equation for how you had to be baptized and how you had to prepare to be baptized was so incredibly specific that, a grain of sand could throw it off. And I saw people who seemed like they were Christians study the Bible and then quote unquote realize that their baptism was never real and have to get baptized. And I saw people get rebaptized because their first baptism, the ICOC said was not legitimate. So I think I just had a lot of doubt as to like, what if I got something wrong? I do feel like in the ICOC, there was a lot of emphasis on us having this perfect knowledge. And it was almost like this knowledge would save
Mhm.
us. Like if we get everything just right, we might barely scrape by under the gates of heaven. Um,
Yeah.
and so
Hmm.
I don't think it was a certain thing. I don't think it was a certain thing that a preacher said. It was just the theology we were marinating in was so legalistic and so
Hmm.
like I don't think I ever understood the idea of grace. Like the closest I came was if I'm incredibly lucky and I get everything just right, then there's a small chance that like I won't go to hell, maybe.
Yeah.
you know.
Our message was definitely not grace.
No.
Like it was almost like your baptism good, feel good,
Hmm.
okay, you did it.
Yeah.
Now get back to work. Now
Yes.
understand that you can lose this.
Yes.
Like,
And yes, a lot of the scriptures in Matthew were used in a way to keep us on our toes. And also in the epistles, it talks about
hmm.
if you think you're standing firm, like I'm forgetting the wording, but like watch out because you
Hmm.
might not be. And in Matthew, when Jesus separates the goats from the sheep, and he says, I never knew you. I think I've done a lot of really in-depth study to come now to a place of peace with those scriptures. Um, but I think it's taken my entire worldview changing, and this is still happening. I'm only 2 years out. I think it's taken my entire worldview changing to seeing through a lens of grace in order to even begin to see something that's different than how the ICOC taught me to interpret those scriptures. I don't know if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
No, it does. It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was told to us in a way because like it's like focusing on grace and love
Hmm.
wouldn't get the results they needed. I think
Yes.
that's my what I'm sort of in my being in this realm of questioning and like exploration of all this
Yeah.
And I see it a lot with other churches as well. It's like you don't really want to talk about grace too much because then they're not going to work.
Right.
Then they're just going to keep sinning. It's like we
Mm-hmm.
can't just be in the space of love and being saved. Um, and you had to, it's that feeling of getting it just right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like you were always either a step closer to heaven or a step back towards heaven, or a
Yeah.
step back towards hell. Like that's how I
Yeah.
feel like everything was doing. And it goes back to that feeling of everything was, we were dealing with things on a spiritual level. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, that was
mhm.
well said.
Yeah. I want to talk about something where you said you were taught to be all things to all men.
Yes. Yeah. So when we were talking before this podcast, there were a few things that we didn't get to just because we went to other things. One thing I mentioned was the duality of some of the things I was taught, how,
Hmm.
in some ways I benefit from this now, but it also did a lot of damage. The idea of being all things to all men, was intended to convert as many people as possible. Um,
Hmm.
And, the benefit I have now is that I'm not scared to talk to anyone. I've shared my faith with a room of 200 people. I've shared my faith for hours with total strangers. And so, like, in my career, in my social life, I'm not scared to talk to anyone. So that's a way that it's benefited me. However, it was very highly manipulative because we were explicitly taught how to relate to people who, um, I don't know how to explain it. It doesn't sound bad to say we were taught to relate to people who are different than us, because there was a focus on diversity that in some ways was good, but being all things to all men, I'm trying to think of how to explain it. Like we were taught to change our personalities and our
Yeah. Hmm.
mannerisms in order to win people into the kingdom. I
Yeah.
remember thinking through how I was going to dress and how I was going to arrange the seating in a room, and the kinds of analogies I was going to use based on what I knew about the person I was studying with. And that's terrible.
Hmm.
I hate how manipulative that was, but that's how I thought it was supposed to be. It was like the ends justified the means. Oh, this person's going to be saved. It'll be worth all the manipulation. And now, honestly, I think, wow, I was lying, but I didn't think that at the time.
Yeah, well, it's basically a sales tactic.
Yeah.
It's just it's what it was. I think you might make a great salesman, you know.
Mm, yeah.
But it's like but you think about it, a salesman's goal is not really anything. Their goal has nothing to do with the person other than get them to
Yes.
buy the thing. And
Yes.
so you have to be whatever it takes to get that
Yeah.
person. And like, the question is there authenticity in that,
Right.
you know?
Right. And I think that during those years, I would have said it was out of love for them, um, because I
Hmm.
didn't want them to go to hell. There's that focus again, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like there was too much. I was experiencing everything through fear that I was not able to love in a pure way because,
Yeah.
I was trying to do something that I thought was good for them. I wasn't trying to do anything that I thought was bad by sharing my faith with all these people and studying with all these people and baptizing all these people. I was trying to do good for them. I thought that's what they needed. That's what I had been taught was what they needed. However, you know, um, it wasn't genuine because it was out of fear. It wasn't out of real compassion for them.
Yeah, and there was always an agenda.
Always.
Hmm. So you weren't just hanging out with people, you weren't talking with people, you weren't caring about people, you were caring with an agenda.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think that knowing that has made me very skeptical of lots of people.
Yeah, that's hard to get over.
Mhm. Because
Yeah.
it's like I fight trusting people
Yes.
or institutions or
Yeah. Me
anything
too.
really, you
Me too.
know?
Yeah. Especially institutions. Yeah.
Hmm. Which I think I'm also grateful that I have that now,
Yeah.
because it gets me to ask questions and do research and to think for a
That's
second, take
true.
a pause. I just
Yes.
wish it didn't take 30 years of toxic
Right.
thing, you
Right.
know?
Right. Yeah. How old were you when you left?
Let's see. My mid to late 20s.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were in
Yeah.
it for the long haul too.
I was. I left and came back. So I was a glutton for punishment.
Oh, sounds like it.
Yeah, I left my junior year of high school and came
Hmm.
back right before I started college.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah. Um
Wow.
so yeah, it's an even longer it was just more of like I could never get it right in high school, and I got tired of trying and just assumed that God didn't want me and I was never going
Hmm.
to get it right. So then
I
I
think
just
we all
left.
believed that.
Yeah, but I just got tired of it because,
Yeah.
I I I
Yeah.
tried to studies so
Yes.
hard and
Mm-hmm.
then it just never I could never seem to prove to the people that I was
Yeah.
serious.
You can never,
They just never seemed that they thought they believed me. So I was like, I'm just tired of it. So I
yeah.
left.
You can never live up to the Pharisaical standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how was dating life like in the church?
So
We gotta
wild.
talk about it. What?
So wild, so weird.
Yeah.
Um, you know, during those years that I was heavily indoctrinated, I thought that was the only way to do it. It's the best way.
Yeah.
It's what the
Hmm.
church is telling me to do.
Hmm.
Um, I think there were fun parts. I think the fun parts were when we went on what we would call encouragement dates, which was just a group date with no romantic um attachment. And there were times that those were really fun because the brothers would put a lot of work into it and we would do like something really special that I think in, what we would call the world, um, people wouldn't put this much effort into dates unless they were like gonna ask someone to get engaged. But this was just how it was for dates. Like I think the guys
Hmm.
put a lot of effort in and that was really fun. Um, the weird thing is I went on my first church date when I was probably 14 and he was in camp he was in college. Um, but
What?
yes, and there
That's
were no
weird.
it was so weird. I thought it was normal at the time. I was like, cool, I get to hang out with college kids. But now looking back, I'm like, hell no. Like
Yeah.
for my daughter, no.
Yeah.
Um, that's just weird. And it truly, that was nothing. Like that wasn't a romantic date. Like it was weird, but it wasn't weird. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, because dating wasn't romantic in the church
Right.
when you think about it.
Unless you were like set up or like there was
Yeah.
intention there. Right.
It was we were to
Right.
protect you from the wolves in the world, and y'all were
Yes.
to
To keep us
cause
from
us not to.
temptation.
Yeah, because if we can't be tempted, boys can't be
Oh,
trusted.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
So that was more just funny. Like, it was innocent and it was fun, but that was more just
Mhm.
funny. Um, yeah, I think that, gosh, there's so many ways, so many directions I could go with that answer. I think um there were a couple times in college that I did what we were called pre-dating, which is where
Mm.
to anyone outside of the ICOC, you're dating, but like you haven't gone through all the loopholes. And so,
Yeah.
you know, those brothers, like, I hope are doing well today. Like, they were kind, those were fine. We just weren't the right fit, and that was okay. Um, let's see. Yeah, in college, I turned down a lot of really nice, really solid guys because we weren't allowed to be yoked together with unbelievers. And I thought, you know, they were unbelievers, even though they were Christians. Um, so that was a thing. I think it was a huge deal that I dated outside the church in high school. Um, I,
You
li-
dated someone outside the church in high school?
I did after I was baptized, so it was even worse. Um,
See, that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it's
how
not
that
like
would
I asked
even.
permission.
No, no, I yeah, no. Was it in secret? Was it like
Oh, so it was really, I don't know how to explain it because I don't know how I got away with it. I think my parents really were afraid that if they forbid me from dating, that I would like rebel more. Um, and to be honest, I wasn't that rebellious of a kid. At this point, I was dating him a little bit in rebellion though. Um, so this was probably several months after I got baptized. I think I got baptized and everything was good for a while. And then just, that hole in my heart that my mental and emotional health were not being taken care of. I was wrestling with a lot of things that were really too big for me to be wrestling with alone. And like I mentioned before, it was coming out in just really self-harming ways. I won't get too much into it, but like I was really in a stage of being suicidal for a long time. And that was a whole other, um, it was just this very dark time. And I think a boy from my school was showing me attention. And I just at that point felt like, I can never live up to this standard. I saw how, again, I'll use the word wretched. I saw how wretched I was before God. And I saw the perfect lives that I thought all these other disciples were living. And I saw just this chasm of discrepancy. And I realized I could never live up to that. And so I think for until then, I had been trying to live up to that. And it just hit a breaking point where I just, this is all a very dramatic way to say like why you started dating, right? But I
Mhm.
was making the conscious decision to run away from God. Um, I had kissed a boy once and it was like a quick peck, but like we started dating and we went like all in physical right away. And it wasn't because, we made a mistake or anything like that. Like I was consciously making the decision of like, I cannot measure up to God's standard. And so I am going to run away from it.
Wow, but you still sort of stayed at church,
Oh yeah,
or
kind of.
yeah.
My I couldn't not go to church. I wasn't allowed. Um, I would like try to get around it, stay the
Hmm.
night at my friend's house or something like that. But the expectation was really heavily that like if you stay the night at your friend's house, we're still going to pick you up in the morning. Um, and
My
I was
parents were the same way.
still, what's that?
My parents were the same way with stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And I was still very much calling myself a Christian. I was part of this like, you know, group of Christian students who we'd have lunch together once a week. Um, but it was because I guess I just thought I had to do those things. I didn't really,
Hmm.
it didn't occur to me that I could be honest about where I was at spiritually. So
Yeah.
for me, being very honest with you about how dark of a place I was in, I was getting great grades. I was involved in a lot of things at school. Um, People regularly told me like, wow, your life is so perfect. Like, you know, um, and I did have a lot to be grateful for, but just like no one looked in and saw the darkness, right? Like I appeared very happy. And so like I was hiding it very well.
Yeah, no one would. It's almost like if you look like everything's fine, no one's going to ask, "Are you
Right.
fine?" They're
Right.
just going to assume that you're fine. And then in our culture, it's like if you're looking, if if it looks like a duck or quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So they're probably like, she's probably fine,
Right. Right.
and we
Right.
just didn't have room to dig any deeper other than like
Right.
mission focused things or the basic kind of talks. Well, I
Right.
mean, basic in a certain, well, because I feel like we got really deep with, I mean, I felt like I got really deep with
Yeah,
my friends, but,
we did.
but,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm. There was
but
this
it's,
deepness. Oh, go on.
go ahead. No, you can continue.
I think there was a large amount of depth, but it was in a way that was my experience is I had a couple really good friendships and a couple of those that I still cherish to this day. But by far you were expected to be vulnerable with people immediately.
Hmm.
You were expected to treat each person as if they were actually your brother or sister. And there was a great amount of depth, but it was very, what's the word? Codependent. Very like it was very
Hmm.
codependent. Um, and I think that if you didn't seem like you were a fire to put out, then once you got baptized, the love bombing's done. Like now, like go do your job, go make disciples,
Hmm.
Um, if you're not struggling spiritually and about to fall away, then they just you're good. Go do what you're supposed to do, disciple. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what's so sad about it is like you're supposed to treat these people like your brothers or sisters, but then something like what you're going through is
Hmm.
just rampant.
Yeah.
You're not the only story
No, not at
of
all. So many
someone,
people have stories like this. Yeah.
and it's hard, but that feeling of never measuring up, never
Hmm.
being able to get it. I mean, it
Right.
is it is that it was such a theme for me too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just for me, I just was like, nope, I'm good. I guess it's not
Hmm.
for me.
Right.
I guess I'm gonna
Yeah.
go to hell. I had to go to
Yeah.
church, but there
Hmm.
was everyone knew I really
Right.
would didn't want to be there.
Really. Wow.
I would go and sit in the back, and I had a couple of friends that we were kind of had to be there too. And so we would
Yeah.
just sit there, and it was the most awkward time of my life.
Man.
My
Yeah.
my mom, I was telling someone my mom thought I was on drugs because what I would do is like I was like, if I have to go, y'all are gonna have to wake
Hmm.
me up to go to church.
Yeah.
So I would be woken up like last.
Oh,
And then I would
yeah.
just get in the car. I would go in the back of the van. I would fall asleep, sleep all the way to church.
Oh,
And then
man.
and so like in my head or my mom's head, she's like, he must be on drugs or something. And
Oh,
she
my
would like talk.
goodness.
She talked to like some other teen guys to try to talk to me. They were so awkward about it.
And
I was
every
like,
other people always you had to go through this process of people. You couldn't
yeah,
just
like,
talk to them directly.
yeah,
Goodness.
Mom, you can talk to me. No, I just don't want to be there, so I'm gonna sleep. I'm
Right.
tired. But
Oh,
yeah. So what got you like, because I mean, you've just been out
yeah.
for 2 years, so
Oh,
what
goodness.
got
Yeah.
you through that?
One last comment about dating though.
Sure.
Just the funny thing was everyone kept telling me that my boyfriend was a pagan because he was Lutheran.
Oh my God.
Anyway, that's just, I think now very funny because what? He's Lutheran, he's not pagan.
I think it's rad that you like, it's funny that I said rad, that
That's hilarious. You're
you
dating
had
yourself.
that you just dated someone that wasn't a
Hmm.
part of the church. Like that takes it takes
Yeah.
balls.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank
Just
you.
because like for me, I had a secret girlfriend
Yeah.
for a little bit of time because
Hmm.
I didn't want to tell anybody because I was
Yeah.
like, I'm attracted to this girl. She showed me attention. This
Yeah.
is awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
just like, you just did it. Wow. Good for you.
Thank
So,
you. Yeah, I was such a people pleaser that I'm still surprised that at that point in my life I did that, but it happened.
yeah.
What was the question you asked though?
Well, I was just gonna say what got you through that time because you've only just been out for 2 years.
Oh, goodness. What got me through the time of like all the dating or the mental and emotional health or like why
Well,
did I leave the
I guess
church?
because like was this through high school that you were dealing with
Mm-hmm.
this? Did you just
Yeah.
break up with him and decide like, no, I'm going to be on
Oh
fire for
gosh.
God and
Yeah,
sold out?
that was such a process. So I went to teen camp and was very convicted that it's wrong to have sex with your boyfriend and you're terrible. Um and like, there was the whole cry night that you've talked about with people. And I got open with my teen group. And then I have to tell them, like, I have to, anyway, I truly did come to the conviction, and as a Christian, I don't think it's right to have sex with someone you're not married with. I'm also not going to tell anyone else what to do in their life as adults. I'm sorry, I'm going on tangents.
It's okay.
Yeah, so I got home from teen camp my senior year of high school, very convicted that I was living in sin, and I decided that I was going to repent. And so,
Hmm.
I told him that like our relationship had to change a lot. And uh, it's a very long story, and I don't think I want to get into all the details of it
Sure.
here on this podcast right now. We ended up still dating for the better part of senior year. And at the end of my senior year, I went to his church with him. And, in my little ICOC brain, heavily indoctrinated, I just thought that his church was terrible and hypocritical. And I don't even remember what offended me about it, but it was so different than what I thought church should be. I think they had a lot of traditions, and that made me very uncomfortable. And they talked about grace, and that made me very uncomfortable because in the ICOC, those are two things you stay away from, grace and traditions. And I think
Yeah.
I just at that point believed that he was not going to change and wasn't really a Christian. And I had had these campus sisters, um, well, really everyone had been telling me for over a year that I was in the wrong. And I think I finally just believed them and broke up with him.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
how that happened. And I mean, like, I'm very glad that that relationship ended. It definitely was not like built on anything strong, but it was an odd process.
Well, at least you didn't have someone tell you that you had to choose him or God.
That's
Like
true.
I had someone tell me that with my secret girlfriend when they found out I had to choose her or God.
Wow. How'd they find out?
I I decided to go on a date with her on a Friday night instead of going to Devo, and I
Ooh.
turned my cell phone off
Oh man.
to not get the rings. And then when I finally turned it back on, I had like seven missed calls.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, I can't deal with this. So then the next day, my friend, who's my one of my friends now, best
Hmm.
friends, and we're still friends. We talk
Yeah.
a lot. He actually called me. He was like, "Hey man, are you okay? Because I called you a couple times
Couple.
and like, are you sick? Are you hurt? Like, what's going on, man?" And so I
Yeah.
just was like, I finally told him. And so then it
Oh,
was like
okay.
triage discipling time at church. And
Oh
they had
no.
that Sunday, and they were just like, this
Hmm.
my discipling partner, everybody was just, man, making me feel like crap. And just like,
Oh
how
man.
can't believe you're doing this, whatever, buzz, she worth it,
Did you
stuff
get
like that.
rebuked?
Yeah, I got rebuked. I got rebuked a lot
Man.
as a but anyway, but yeah, so that's how I did.
Okay.
That's so
Wow. Yeah.
so so you're getting through there, you're in college, like when did things start to get weird for you?
Ah,
I mean, it kind of feels like I'm seeing it was always kind of there,
it
but
was
like,
always weird. It was always weird, but I didn't see it
mhm,
until like six major things coalesced within
mhm,
2 years of each other. Um, I think the most minor thing that got weird was just realizing that friendships weren't what I wanted them to be. I felt like
mhm,
I was um giving my all and really trying, and I felt like with the exception of a few just really genuine people who I still really love, with that exception though, it just felt like friendships were very gosh, I don't know how to describe it. They weren't what I wanted them to be. Um and during the COVID years, I think I really especially struggled to connect with people. And on its own, that's not why I left, because that was for years like that. Um, I think the second thing is that my husband had broken the biggest rule in the ICOC, not really. One of the big rules, which is you're not supposed to be friends with people outside the church unless you're actively reaching out to them.
mhm,
Um, and so he actually, a few years before we left, had, through another long story, but gotten this really close core group of men who are Christians. We're still great friends with them. But through that process, he started to see that something was weird and different. And we'd been told all these things growing up of other churches don't practice discipleship. They don't really love Jesus. They don't know anything about the Bible. They are just as lost as the world. Like all this dogma that we were taught about how other Christians are. And we didn't know anything better because both he and I were raised in the church and we believed what they told
Your
us.
husband's a kingdom kid too.
He is. He is.
Wow.
Yeah. He has his own whole story,
Yeah.
as we all do. Um, but what was I gonna say? Oh, we just started to see that something was weird, and we started to see that what the church had told us about other Christians wasn't actually true. Like here we saw these people who loved Jesus, loved people, um, practiced discipleship. They were not hypocrites. They weren't arrogant. I don't know. I don't know what else to say other than just we started to see that what we'd been told didn't match up with reality. And so my husband was ready to leave the church 2 years before I was. And he was really patient with me. And I'm grateful because when he first started talking about it, it really scared me. I thought he was falling away. I thought, like, I just saw our whole family crumbling into pieces because, they catastrophize if
Hmm.
someone leaves the church. And so I was really not ready and really not open to it. Um, but that was one of the first seeds that was planted, kind of a deep seed of not everything I've been taught is true. I think the second or third really big thing was my brother's death. We had always been taught like that there was some level of just protection for disciples in the ICOC. No one explicitly said nothing bad will happen to you, but like whenever they would do the Kidogo announcements or whatever they would call them, they would always talk about how, in this war zone, all the disciples in that church were protected. Or there would be lessons where they would talk about, like at teen camp, oh, this kid stopped studying the Bible and then he died in a car accident the next day. Like things like that. Like those things actually
Did they
got
ever,
said.
did you ever
Yeah.
hear the story about the lady in, it was around 9/11 where she was a
Yes.
disciple. She worked at the World
Yes.
Trade Center, but she decided to go get her Bible
Yes.
before she went to work, and that saved her. Yeah.
Yep.
No, yep,
Yeah.
all those stories. Hmm.
Yes. And so I never would have said in conscious words that I thought nothing bad could happen to you within the church. But I think I had heard so many radical testimonies of, oh, I was a drug addict and now look at me. And my brother was a drug addict. And so when he overdosed and died, I really like it did not compute with how I thought the world worked. I always thought that he was going to have this great testimony and he was going to come to the Lord. Um, and so we had the funeral there at our church, and
Hmm.
every Sunday, like I just because of that, I felt like I was being grief punched walking in the door. And for the first time, like even during my crazy teen years, yeah, not really, like, but for the first time, like it was really hard for me to be at church. I felt like it just kept taking me back to like what had happened with him. And so that was when I started not wanting to go to church, but I still wasn't ready to leave. Um,
Did people,
sorry.
if you don't mind me asking, did people sort of talk about your brother's death in that realm of like, look at what happened to him or something like that? Or like,
No, so here's what was confusing to me. Typically when other people would have family members die who hadn't been
yeah,
baptized into
mhm,
ICOC, people would pretty bluntly say, like, well, they're in hell, the
yeah,
people like everyone would tell me um like uh there the timing of his death was tricky because he was in the
hmm,
hospital for a week, right? And so we got to say goodbye and all that. He was in a coma. Um, but people kept telling me like, and this is the first time and the last time I ever heard this, but people kept telling me like God is merciful and like maybe he made an exception for him. And like people would more tell me like he's in a better place now. And it just didn't compute in my mind because I'd never heard anyone say that about someone who had died who wasn't a disciple in the ICOC. And
Hmm.
so I understand that the sentiment was meant in kindness, and I prefer that to people being like, he's in hell. But it was very confusing to me because that was completely different than every other message I'd ever heard.
Okay, I see that. Yeah. It's
Hmm.
it's like they were trying to make you feel better, as most people do when something like
Yeah,
this
I think
happens,
it was meant well, right?
but but yeah, I understand that. Like, I mean, that thought process of like, I never
Hmm.
had the process of like
Hmm.
nothing bad's gonna happen to me,
Right.
but I did equate bad things happening to me to my lack of work within
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Bible. And
Yeah.
so like I still struggle with the feeling of if anything
Yeah.
bad happens in my life right now, it's because I wasn't taking something seriously
Hmm.
from God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that have to have
Yeah.
been hard. So you have the funeral at the church and then
Hmm. Yeah,
um
and then just I think a couple more things that came together into the perfect storm. And I do think
mhm,
I was so bought into the ICOC that it had to be all these things together, or I probably wouldn't have been ready to leave.
mhm,
I think my husband was getting to the point like where he'd been very patient, but he was like, for my own spiritual well-being, like, please can we try different churches? And I think I finally got to the point because of like being grief punched every Sunday walking in those doors that I said, fine. Like I, it still scared me, but I said, fine, we can check out other churches. Um, and I fully had the expectation that we were going to leave and then find out it was as terrible out there as we'd always been told, and we'd be back, right? That was what I
yeah,
thought. Um,
yeah,
but I
mhm,
think the two big things that made me really be sure about leaving, one was one of my friends invited me to this prayer night at this charismatic church. And it was so foreign to anything I'd ever experienced. You know, there was speaking in tongues, um, there was laying on of hands. It was wild. But everything they did, because I knew the scriptures very well, I ran through a filter of how the Bible said to do those things, and they did it biblically. And this person who was speaking in tongues and praying told me things that I had had in my own mind and heart that I had never told another person. And it wasn't like stuff that's easy to guess. Like this person didn't know
yeah,
me. Um, and like the whole time was talking about Jesus and how he's the son of God. And like everything was biblically, like if you're going to be speaking in tongues, this is how the Bible says to do it. Right. And I still don't know where I land on that, but I definitely saw like my eyes were open to the first time for how we never talked about the Holy Spirit. And now I
yeah,
think that's because, you know, if we're being guided by the Holy Spirit, then it's harder to control people. But my eyes started being opened to, first of all, that I don't know, it was a lot. I think the biggest takeaway was that my church was devoid of the Holy Spirit.
mhm,
And that was a really big deal. I think the other thing that happened was lawsuits came out, right? The Rolling Stone article. I mentioned abuse
mhm,
that had happened. One thing I didn't say that I think is pretty telling about the church is that in college, I, or was it high school? No, it was college. I finally told my women's ministry leader what had happened in my childhood. And she said I had to tell my mom, even though I was an adult at this point. Um, and it ended up being, and so, gosh, I wasn't ready. I didn't want to. I thought I had to. I did not understand that I may have
mhm,
had a choice. I didn't think I had a choice. And it ended up being this thing where I sat down in this group with my mom, the women's ministry leader, and like three or four other random sisters. And they just grilled me and asked me questions about what happened, and to the point, and like in a we're not sure if we believe you way. And finally, at the end of it, I said, "Yeah, no, you're right. I misunderstood. That's not really what happened." And
Mm,
that's not true, but it's like they questioned me and questioned me, and I was already feeling so scared to be there that finally I just broke and said nothing ever happened. And so when these lawsuits came out and the rhetoric around our churches were, it happened a long time ago, it was one or two cases. I'm sitting over here, half of my friends have had things like this happen, and everyone's story is different. Um, and I had another situation like that too, where in high school I was raped, right? And I told again the women's ministry leader, and this was a different women's ministry leader, not the same one. This is a different year. Like at this point, I don't know why I told anyone, but I think in the ICOC, you always thought you had to tell people serious things, right? Um,
yeah. Hmm.
and I guess I do want to say, like, eventually, like, I found safe people who were supportive, even in the ICOC. So this was not everyone's response, but I think just the fact that leadership was so, um, like, putting all of the blame on the person whose fault it was not. Um, and so in that situation, I also tried to tell my campus leader, and she said, well, sometimes women have sex with someone and then they regret it and they say it's rape. And like sharing all those very personal things, the reason is because when these lawsuits came out, all of the conversation that I heard was, well, of course that's bad. It's terrible that that happened, but like that's not really happening anymore. It was that long ago. Half of it's probably exaggerated. Like it was, does that make sense? It was those types of
Yeah.
conversations that I was hearing.
Yeah, it's because it's like this thing of like the system matters more than the people inside the system.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it is.
Hmm.
And then it's also this feeling of like it's like you attack the abused rather than the abuser.
Yeah.
And it feels like I mean it's just a cover up,
Yeah.
because it's like if this happens and this one if we accept that this one thing happened, then where
Hmm.
else has it happened? And
Right.
it's like it's almost like there's this fear of this is just my observation. It's like if it's happened once, it probably happens a lot. And then what does
Right.
that mean for this whole thing? And then, you
Right.
know, and then for me, it's like, well, it means the thing's kind of messed up and we need to figure this all out,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
that should be like, this should be
Hmm.
the response.
Yeah.
But instead of the response, it's like, no, are you sure?
Yeah.
And I don't even want to take the stance of like saying, yeah, you should ask, are you sure? I mean, I think because no, I just like,
Right.
it's not okay how these
Right.
things are handled in
Right.
churches. It's because
Right.
unfortunately our church is not special in the sense that
Right.
this stuff happens.
Right.
But what's so hard is that feeling of you forcing you to talk about it in a
Yes.
situation that is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen for you, what happened for you is what happens for everybody. They're going to clam
Hmm.
up, they're going to freak out, they're going to start questioning what they're feeling, and
Right.
they're questioning their memories.
Right.
And you just want to get out of it, so you're going to say what you need to say. I mean, that happens with it happened with me, not to the scale of what happened to you, but with just simple
Yes.
discipling times
Yeah.
where you're getting you just want to say what you need to say to get
Yeah.
out of the situation because you're scared, you're frustrated, you feel like your mind's all screwy because they're
Yeah.
saying things like maybe like they always put it on you in our
Yeah.
system. So
Oh, absolutely.
well,
Yeah.
they love the system more than the people in it, and they're so afraid of losing the comfortability of this thing that they want to protect the thing more than the people in the thing.
Right. And I think that's why justice gets handled in-house so much, which is why they're
Yeah.
going through all these lawsuits right now.
Yeah. And people also, other people just, they don't want to hear that this stuff happens. They
Yeah.
want to find ways to say that it's not either,
Hmm.
maybe it's not real.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
People love their comfort zones and people love what they have. But it's not just one, and it's happened a lot, and it's happened a lot for years. I
Right.
mean, I've read news articles from the 70s where things were happening, and so
In the ICOC or just in other
yeah,
churches in general.
in the ICOC from the beginning with other leaders
Wow.
back in the 70s, and it's just it's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
It's just
So, yeah.
it just doesn't make sense because like it feels like the response should be
Hmm.
support, love, caring.
You would think. Yeah. And there were
So
people at times who responded like that. Not everyone had this callous response. But I think
yeah,
just the fact that it came from leadership um, really made me feel like, wow, I am in the wrong. Like, they're right, because everything the leaders said, we're right.
yeah, fuck that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I agree.
Um, so so how soon was it after those things that you decided to leave?
So those all happened within about the broader spectrum happened within 2 years, but really, um, I think the prayer night, the my husband just being like, I really, really need to leave this church and like imploring me. And um the lawsuits coming out all happened within a few months. And I think when my husband really started imploring me, that's when I realized how serious it was to him. Because I think my lens of fear before that didn't really let me see what his needs were. I think I was just seeing through the lens of like it's scary that he's going to fall away, right? And I have to bring him back from the precipice. And so I think when he like really, really helped me understand where he was at, then I was willing to look at other churches, but it was still terrifying. And it was still terrifying, but I
Yeah.
think when the
Mhm.
lawsuits came out were when I was like, I'm glad we're leaving. That was the nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And so that was like the lawsuits came out like a month after we started looking at other churches.
So what was life like after you left?
It's
Or
been a
how's it been? Yeah. 2 years.
um so good. It's been really hard at times. It's been a lot to unpack, but ultimately so good. Um, we, you know, did end up finding a church that really is a great fit for us. And coming from the ICOC, nothing is normal, but I think it's probably just a normal, like relatively healthy church.
Yeah.
Um, and every place has their problems, and I expect that. So it's not perfect, and we're not trying to find that. It's just, you know, Christian. Not,
Yeah.
not ICOC. I don't know. It has been such a journey. It's been very hard and very lovely. I think in the beginning, there was a lot of freaking out and panicking on my part. Not outwardly, but just inwardly. Um, it has taken a lot to get to a point where I'm not scared of being outside of the ICOC. But at this point, I just, I think the biggest things are, I know I've talked about it already, but it has changed my life and my worldview, just seeing things through a lens of grace, and not
Yeah.
condemnation. I think I'm lucky that our pastor is a scholar and I have a lot of really deep Bible questions. And so I've been able to bring those and say, like, hey, I'm terrified about this scripture in Matthew. Can you please give me the context here? And there's been a million questions, but I think having like just people who aren't afraid to dive into those questions and don't question my spirituality because I'm trying to figure things out has been very healing. I think just the culture outside of the ICOC, people have been a lot more like I don't know. I feel like in the ICOC we learn to overshare, so I still have that problem and I'm trying to unlearn that. But I
I
do
was
think,
I was gonna ask you if you overshare.
oh
I was
yes,
gonna ask you if there was like a quirk that you
that
have
isn't obvious. Yeah.
that you notice that you do.
Yeah. And I feel like I can't,
Oversharing's the easy one.
yes. And part of it's that I just can't stand BS. Like I want something to be genuine, but I do end up oversharing because that's how we were taught to be. And I'm trying to get better at that. I'm not good at that. Um,
I will tell people anything and everything, and
yes.
it turns people off so
Mm,
fast, you know.
yeah. Yeah. But I lost track of
Sorry.
my train of thought. I
It's
think
okay.
I
Yeah,
think
that's my fault.
just finding grace, well, not only in my lens of how I understand scripture, but also receiving it from other people. Even, you know, when I share light things or when I share heavy things, I think in general people have like responded kindly and believed me. And that's been because of like the experiences I shared, that's meant more to me than they could possibly know.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and so I feel like people have just surprised me with their kindness outside of the kingdom. I always thought that people outside of, what we called the kingdom was it's been so different than what I was always told it would be if I fell away.
Yeah.
Um,
You were not gonna have friends. You were not gonna, your marriage was gonna fall apart. You
yeah,
know, you couldn't trust anyone, all those
yeah,
things.
yeah. And so I think I found a lot of freedom. It is still scary at times. I think the times that it's scary have gotten fewer and fewer. Um,
What makes
because
it scary? Sorry.
well,
What make
not anymore, but like when I first left, because I was afraid that like so I guess it's not really scary anymore. When I first left for the first like year, it was pretty scary because I really thought I might go to hell if I wasn't in the
Yeah.
ICOC, and
Hmm.
all the things you said, I thought my marriage was going to fall apart and I wasn't going to find real friendships and everyone was
Gotcha.
going to
Hmm.
be worldly and there were no real disciples out there. And it was like choose freedom or choose God in the ICOC. Like I think all of these ideas I was raised with, and none of this from my parents, but like from just growing up steeped in what the church was teaching.
Yeah. Hmm.
So now it's really not scary. Now it's very freeing. I think trying to think about how I want to say it. I think the biggest thing other than grace has been realizing that I have a say in like my life decisions. I don't have to go to a
Yeah.
discipler to get advice. I don't have to make decisions in a really scared way because I know exactly what the church would want me to do in this situation. Like I still try to make good decisions, and I think there's been a lot of freedom in realizing that I have a say in who I want to be and how I want to live. And also, and that's been scary because it's been exhilarating making my own
Oh, yeah.
choices and figuring out who I am, figuring out who I want to be. It's been, I guess the fear I'm talking about currently is more that exhilaration of this is terrifying,
Yeah.
but it's freeing. Um,
Yeah. Because
and
we did not have agency over ourselves.
no, we didn't.
Mhm.
We didn't. And I think there's something else. Just, hmm, I don't know. Trying to remember what I was going to say. I think, oh, just there was always this presupposition that as a disciple, you must be all these things. You must meet all of these standards and, watch out or you're going to fall. And I think, I am still trying to live as a Christian. And most kingdom kids I know, like who I personally know, just have so much hurt that they're not able to do that. And I understand that. Um, but personally still striving for God, I think it's been very wonderful realizing that I'm allowed to be human. I'm not, I don't have to be this super disciple all the time. and it's
Yeah.
okay just to be human. And that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. I'm glad you found that, you know?
Yeah,
We could never be okay with who we are in a moment, you know? There was always work to be done.
right.
Yeah.
Always.
Mhm. What's helped you through it the most?
I do think I've been very supported. I have had some really good people in my life.
Yeah.
I have also done years of therapy. You know,
Nice.
I did EMDR for just all the PTSD and
So have
lovely
I.
things like that. Really, it's great,
I've
isn't
done
it?
EMDR as well.
Yeah. Um,
It's such a rad tool.
it
Man,
is.
it's so wild. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, definitely I've done a lot of really purposeful work. Um, a lot of really purposeful work. But I also think that combined with I just have some really great people in my life, both now and at points that I've needed it in the past. And so I feel like I've had a strong support system. Um, Even though both my husband and I, being Kingdom kids and being raised in the ICOC, we both have, you know, very particular baggage. We also are really able to understand each other. So I think I feel very grateful. Sometimes that makes things hard because we both have this story, but I'm also really grateful because I feel like there's someone who understands me. And so
You don't have
just
to
having these
explain things.
relationships,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, my wife was never a part of the church, so in the beginning, a
Yeah.
lot of our conversations were explaining things. It gets
Yeah,
hard, you know?
right. And I feel like when I try to explain to people in less than 2 hours, it I either I either I either fail to share the full spectrum and I make it sound like it was just terrible, and I don't want to do that because there were a lot of really well-meaning people, or I brush over it. And then they are like, oh, so it was just a legalistic church. And it's like, not quite. So it's
Yeah.
hard to explain.
Well, I think the hard part about this is the
Hmm.
amount of time that we were
Yes.
in this.
Yes.
Because in something for 30 years, you're gonna
Hmm.
have
Yeah.
good things. And I think
Yeah.
because I struggle with the good memories as well.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, there's people that I care about. There's people that show me
Yes.
love that I was seen and heard.
Yeah.
And I think when I think about my like what does it feel to have a healthy like approach to this? It's like you can honor the good for what it was in your life
Yeah.
and then honor the bad for what it not honor the bad, but recognize that there was the
Yeah.
bad.
Right.
And you can have both of them there and neither of them can take from each other because I
Right.
think the last thing we need to do is gloss over the bad. Like we need
Right.
to give the space for the bad, for the hurt, for the pain, you
Right.
know. And this
Yeah.
is just kind of I don't know, I just feel like I'm lucky that I have good memories as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because I don't want the bad to take from the good, and I don't want the good to take from the bad.
Right. It's so much nuance. And that's another
Yeah.
thing that I didn't necessarily learn growing up was how to hold nuance. And so I think
Yeah.
that's been something I'm learning as well, is that something can be wonderful and it can be terrible.
Yeah, it's like my dad passing away. It's hard and it sucks. And
Yeah.
it's like I'm grateful that I had a father, but
Yeah.
when I think about my father, I also think about the fact that he died
Right.
sooner than I wanted him to, you know?
Right. Right.
But you can hold the space for it at the same time
Right.
to like I hold the space for him to have the memories and also I have to honor the fact of the pain of his loss.
Right. Yeah.
It's it sounds counterproductive to me, but I think it's also we have to.
Right.
And I
Right.
think
Yeah.
and a lot of people are trying to when we tell stories like this, they go, but no, no, but see, it wasn't all bad. And I'm just like, God, that's not, of course I
Right.
know that. That's,
Right.
you know,
Right. Right. And I get afraid of telling my story, and because of how they respond in the ICOC, people saying, "Oh, she's just bitter," and writing it off, you know?
oh, yeah. Like, you're not bitter. We just didn't have a chance to speak about this
Right. Right.
or knew we could,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
so, nuance, man, it would be so much easier if it was just one or the other, you know? Like if life
Agreed.
could just be this simple thing that you could just cut into this, it's either this or it's that, and then you
Right.
could just live your life, right?
Right.
What would you want to tell people like that have left or are
Hmm.
thinking of leaving or something that you think might help?
I think one, to just be patient with yourself and
Mhm.
to allow yourself to go at the pace that you need to realize that this is a journey. It's not all or nothing. And I think also I would want to speak to their fears if they're afraid of leaving the ICOC, that, you know, of course there is brokenness out there as well. It's not perfect. Once you leave, that doesn't solve all your problems, but it's not as terrifying as it's been painted to be.
Mhm.
Um, so I think just I would hope to speak to their fears, that there's a lot of good out there, and there's a lot more good than we were taught to believe is out there. And also just that, take it one day at a time. Try to find a
Yeah,
support system outside the church. Yeah.
cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with me. I'm
Thank you
grateful
for
to
providing thank you for
grateful.
providing a space for that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm grateful to have met you and to been in this conversation with you. I hope that it continues to move you forward in your healing. Oh, and I forgot the last question. What do you think? We were in a cult?
Yes. Um, I've done a lot of reading about cults, and you know, the reason I started thinking it was a cult was because I was listening to a podcast about one of the major cults that someone grew up in, because someone had sent it to me. And I was listening to this podcast. This was about 4 months after we left the church. And I was thinking, wow, this sounds just like my childhood. And this is like one of those major cults that everyone hears about. And so that really made me pause. And then I started doing research a lot on cults. And, there's Stephen Hassan in his BITE model. It's like an acronym for
Yeah.
the ways that make something a cult. And I even
Hmm.
found on his page, the Freedom of Mind, they have like some of the major cults and break them down for how they fit. And the ICOC is on there. And it
Yeah.
like fits every single one. And so, yes, yeah, we were in a cult.
I think it's his book, yeah, The Freedom of Mind, where he talks about Kip McKean
Oh yeah.
holding up his book and telling people
Yeah.
to not read it.
Oh yeah. Wow. Spiritual
Yes.
pornography.
Oh God. Ugh. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, well, thank you so
Yeah.
much for being a part of here and for being adding this to the growing conversation.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah. Again, thank you all for your support in this growing conversation that is We Were in a Cult. If you or someone you know was a member of the ICOC or the ICC and would like to come on and share their story, please reach out to me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com, or you can direct message me at the Clemens with a Z Instagram page. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest thing you can do is to like, share, rate, and review it. If you'd like to support the podcast financially, you can go to the GoFundMe link that will be in the show notes, as well as in the bio of the Clemens with a Z Instagram page. So until next time, guys, peace.